In the summer of 1944, the Allies faced a problem that sounds boring until you realize it could have stopped the liberation of Europe. Armies do not run on courage, they run on fuel. Once troops broke out from the Normandy beaches, every truck, tank, bulldozer, ambulance, and fighter squadron needed a constant river of petrol. Tankers could bring fuel across the channel, but tankers were slow, exposed, and limited. Storms could interrupt unloading. Ports were damaged. German attacks were still possible, and the faster the Allies advanced, the more dangerous the supply gap became. So Britain built something extraordinary. It was called Operation PLUTO, pipelines under the ocean. The idea was almost absurd. Instead of relying only on fuel ships, Allied planners would pump petrol from England through submarine pipelines laid across the English Channel directly into liberated France. Not after the war. During the war, while the invasion was still unfolding. That meant solving problems nobody had solved at this scale before. The pipeline had to survive underwater pressure, rough handling, currents, and long continuous distances. Engineers developed two main systems. One was high-ICS, a flexible lead-covered cable-like pipe. The other was Hamel, a steel pipe that could be wound onto enormous floating reels called Conundrums. Those reels were among the strangest machines of the war. They looked like giant rolling spools towed at sea, slowly unwinding pipeline behind them as specialized ships laid the line toward France. This was not a side project. It was a strategic gamble. If PLUTO worked, the Allies would have a hidden, continuous fuel artery running beneath one of the most contested stretches of water on Earth. If it failed, the armies racing across France would keep depending on vulnerable shipping and overloaded ports. The first attempts were difficult. Early lines from the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg had problems, and not every section performed as planned, but the concept kept improving. The big breakthrough came later from Dungeness to Boulogne, where longer and more reliable lines began feeding the advance into northwest Europe. And that matters because by late 1944, the Allied campaign had become, above all, a contest of movement and supply. Every mile east multiplied the need for fuel. The famous frontline victories are remembered. The hidden systems that made them possible usually are not. PLUTO was one of those systems. At pumping stations, disguised inside ordinary seaside buildings, fuel entered the network in England. At control centers, technicians monitored pressure, flow, and line conditions. At sea, pipe-laying crews and tugs handled equipment that was heavy, delicate, and absolutely unforgiving. There was nothing glamorous about it, but there was genius in it. By the end of the war, PLUTO had delivered enormous quantities of fuel to the continent and helped reduce dependence on tanker traffic across the Channel. Historians still debate exactly how decisive it was compared with all other supply methods. But that is not the interesting part. The interesting part is that the Allies were so obsessed with momentum that they literally industrialized an undersea fuel bridge in the middle of World War II. That is the kind of story war history often hides in the background. Not a battle, not a speech, not a famous commander standing in a jeep, but a pipe under dark water carrying the energy of an entire offensive. Operation PLUTO was invisible, unromantic, and deeply weird. It was also real. And for the armies pushing from Normandy toward Germany, that invisible pipeline was one of the quiet machines that kept victory moving.